KET 1460. Welcome to Conversations with Marion Roble.
Good morning and welcome to Conversations. I'm very excited about today's show for several reasons. First of all, we're going to be talking about an interesting topic with a very interesting lady who's written a book, her first, about her own personal experiences. And because my connection to Gale Perkins came through a very old friend of mine, Bernie Zutto, we were just talking about my polka world for many years and then became a close personal friend, he and his wife, Dottie, and the whole family. And we were chatting the other day, as he reminded me about a big event coming up in a few weeks. And at the end of the conversation, he kind of like, oh, by the way, I have a friend that I knew many years ago, and I've just reconnected with Gale Perkins. She's written a book about our mutual experiences at Lakeville Hospital. Well, with a few more questions, I found out that Lakeville Hospital, that I had heard about, was doing amazing things for many years. And both Bernie and Gale were recipients of that special kind of life, but an interesting one. So we thought, we've got to talk to her. And the more I talked to Bernie, I said, we've got to talk to you too, because you've each got a very special story to tell. So Gale, Bernie, nice to have you with me this morning.
Hello, Gale.
Thanks for coming in. Gale, it was a big chunk of your life at Lakeville Hospital. What'd you say, 12 years?
It was 12 years for me.
In a row, just 12 years?
3 to 15 straight.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
But that was quite a while ago. What prompted you to put the book together at this point in time?
Well, I lost my husband about 8 years ago, and one of his last wishes was to please write my story.
Oh.
Because he knew it pretty well, but I didn't talk too much about it to too many people. And
Neither did he. That's why I never knew. Neither did Bernie, yeah.
He said it was a story worth telling.
Absolutely.
And so I wanted to keep that promise, and that happened. And when the book was actually together and sent to the publisher, it was his birthday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, even though he'd been gone a while.
Yeah, but things just fall into place.
Yes, they do.
As we've already discussed. And the book is called The Baby's Cross. First of all, I'm curious about if you had any difficulty getting it published, because I talk to so many authors who sometimes wind up publishing something themselves because it is so difficult. How did that
I did
go?
self-publish.
You did, okay.
Yes, I just, I went to my computer and typed in the browser publishers, and the first one that came up was First Books. And I didn't go any further. I went with that. It's now called Author House. It's just changed
I've
its
heard of it
name.
as First Books, yes.
Yes, and it's in Indiana. And so I started. I actually started on June the 15th, and I sent it out on June 29th.
Wow.
And I had things pretty much compiled over the years, and I just had to get it organized.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent it out on the 29th, and I got my very first copy on October 5th.
That's the fastest I've ever heard of anybody getting a book written and published.
Well, I think because I had so much of it written, and I would never have put it together if it wasn't for Irv. He's the new person in my life, and he has really stood by and helped me. Even at times when I said, I don't think I can do this, let's just fold it up.
Well, not as a professional writer. I mean,
No, I did take a course online before I
that
put
was
it
interesting,
together.
yeah.
I took a course through a local college, Northern Essex, in Haverhill, and that was interesting, and I got a lot of nice feedback from the other people that were taking the course from all over the
what's that
states.
like? I've often thought about that myself. What's that like? You do little writings and get them
They
compared?
send you the assignments, and then they give you, things to write about. Like one was to take one of the pictures and look at it and experience the feelings and so forth, and then you write about it, about
Good idea.
feelings that
Oh.
came up, and that's how it started. They also used what they call the bubble method. So like when I was picking the title in a circle on paper, I'd write title, and then I'd have all these little circles coming out from it, and I'd put the titles in there. And that's how I did the whole book. Every subject I wrote on, I did this. And
So it gave you some good tricks of how to get your mind.
It gave me some really
Yeah.
great tricks. And the interesting thing is, just recently, after the book was published and out and whatever, I went back to my notes, and I went back to this bubble method. The title of the book isn't even there.
The Baby's Cross.
The Baby's Cross came to me actually around 1:30 one morning. I woke up, and I said, Irv, I have the title of my book. And he said, go back to sleep. And he said, it's nighttime. I said, no, it's not. It's 1:30 in the morning. And the title, The Baby's Cross, the lady you see on the cover of the book was my mother's sister.
Okay.
She came to visit me. I had just turned 3 years old that day.
Is that you in the picture?
That's me.
Wow.
I had just turned 3, and my mother was dying in another hospital
Oh,
of tuberculosis.
Oh.
And so 2 days later, she went to visit my mother and told her about the visit. And my mother wrote a poem, which I actually didn't get until probably 10 years ago,
Oh, my heavens.
called The Baby's Cross.
Huh.
So I thought, how appropriate.
What else would you, oh, that's a...
How appropriate to put that in the book, and to put that for a title. So I said, here she left. She was 24 when she died.
What happened?
In tuberculosis.
Oh, you said, I'm sorry.
And
yes.
here she left me this gift.
Oh, yes.
This was
Isn't
a
it?
gift.
Again, all meant to be, all
Right.
falling into place.
Absolutely.
Now, were you an only child?
No, she had remarried, and she had one more child, and it was my half-sister that brought me the box of poems, because she had had them for many, many years, and Elaine, and she brought them to me, and it was kind of strange, because the day she brought them was the first day that my husband got sick. And he never came home from work. She was waiting for him to come home, and they called me and said he was in the hospital.
Oh, my goodness.
And then the turn of events from there just went. So I really do truly believe that, our life is all set out for us, and we have to be open and watch what's
If you're watching
happening.
what's gonna
You
happen,
have to
yeah.
see. And I've always had that gift of being able to see. Sometimes it's scary.
Yes, sometimes it's scary. You're right about
Sometimes
that.
it's scary.
But you have to, as you said, you need to be open
Right.
to the whole idea. But, I mean, so many tragedies
Yes,
in
a
your
lot
life.
of them.
So many people go along life very smoothly without ever having anything happen, and they don't understand how you cope. And until they start happening to you personally, those of us who had good luck for many, many years, but when that starts to happen, then you begin to realize what it is. And you also find strength that you didn't even know you had, I
do.
think.
Yes.
I know it certainly happened that way with me. I found strength that I never would have believed that was there. Let's back up to your story. Why were you in the hospital at age 3?
Well, when I was, I think when I was 2
You were,
years
because you were
old.
born prematurely. We should
I
go
was
back
born,
to that.
Right.
Very
I
young,
was born
very-
prematurely. I weighed about 2 pounds.
Uh-huh.
And everything they were giving me, any formula they gave me, I couldn't keep it down. So they used to keep me, like, on the door of the oven, with the oven on
For
to
the
keep
warmth,
me
yeah.
warm. And there was a woman down the street, a neighbor of my grandmother's, and she had just had I think it was her 8th child. And she knocked on the door and she said to my grandmother, Mrs. Logan, she said, I hear you're having problems with the baby. She said, I have an overabundance of breast milk. I would like to give you
Meant to
some.
be, too.
And so this is what happened, and I started to thrive after that.
So she was your first savior.
So she was my first savior. And then when I was a year old, almost 2 years old, I fell down the stairs.
Oh, my gosh.
And I hurt my back. And the interesting thing is, Marion, I have talked to so many people since I wrote the book, and a lot of the tuberculosis they had in their bodies, started with a fall.
No kidding.
Yeah,
never knew
it
that.
seemed to get infected. Well, I didn't either. I thought I was maybe unique. I don't know. But a lot of the people I've talked to, this is the way it's
So then the
been.
tuberculosis caught up with you, too.
Well, then it caught up with me eventually. I was fine for about a year. Nobody noticed anything. And then I think my uncle threw me up in the air. And when he went to catch me, I guess I was just in terrible pain. And then my great aunt came in, and just before that, my grandfather died and my grandmother died, and they had adopted me. And so when my great aunt came in, my grandmother's sister, to take over the family, she just they somehow found out everybody was kind of sick. My mother was, even though my mother had remarried, she was sick, and we all got dispersed to different hospitals.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
But that's interesting, too, because I remember hearing about, tuberculosis in cousins' families and so forth when I was growing up. And the first thing they did was remove it was thought of as being highly contagious.
Right, it
correct?
was in the lungs.
So that, it could have even been a congenital thing.
Mhm.
do
When
you
it's
think?
in the lungs, it's very contagious because of coughing and
Yeah, where else would
so
it be?
forth.
It can be in the whole body,
It's
apparently.
in your bones. I had it in
Really?
my back. I think, Bernie, it was in your hip. Knee. People had it, some of the children had it in their eyes, their ears, their glands,
Boy, that's news to me.
kidneys,
Huh.
everywhere.
I always thought of it as, the Lung Association and
Absolutely.
the stamps they used to, sell
But
and everything.
evidently, other than, if you had open sores or anything like that, contact, it wasn't contagious because,
Well,
it's in your skin.
was a cousin on my father's side, and she was an adult when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And she married and had a couple of children, and then was diagnosed, I thought, with a typical, lung. And she was away for several years in a hospital, and the husband raising the children alone for a few years. But then she came back home cured and live the rest of her life normally. So I just associated that always with lung and
Right.
always with a separation immediately.
Well, a lot of people died. They didn't make
Yeah.
it. But the people that it became arrested and they were able to live, but some of them would take medicines or they didn't have the medicine they have today. But I know my aunt that I lived with, she had it, and she was only 14 when they broke up the house, and she went into a hospital. And she used to have to go back every year, as far as I can remember, I think, until maybe 5 years before she died, because she ended up dying with cancer. But she used to go in and have her one lung collapsed all the time in order for her to breathe
My goodness.
normally, and that was from the tuberculosis.
So it was a continuing thing. And you were there for 12 years straight,
Yes, I was.
the whole time
The
with
whole
them
time.
working on the tuberculosis? I mean, that you had to stay there all.
I had a couple of spinal fusions, and the second one I had, they kind of cut too deep and hit the nervous system, so I was paralyzed for 3 years.
Oh, my gosh.
Not to walk. They didn't think I'd ever leave the hospital or walk again. But what happened is the polio epidemic hit.
Mm-hmm.
So they decided, well, we're restoring muscles in people's bodies with physical therapy and so forth. So they decided to try it on me,
Oh,
and they did. And so, as I always say, somebody else's pain was my gain, because then I started, moving my
the physical
legs
therapy
and so
really
forth
did.
and so on.
Isn't that interesting?
Right. I walked with, in the beginning, I was telling them yesterday at the senior center, I had braces on my teeth, braces on my legs, and a brace on my back.
Oh,
And I tell my kids I was the first heavy metal star.
and you're a tiny little girl.
Little, right.
All of your weight was in braces. It was
Right,
nothing.
there you
Nothing.
go.
Isn't that amazing? But now, see, that's interesting too, because you're saying all these things are popping into my head. I remember hearing about children having the parents do what they call patterning, when they were not able to do the movements themselves.
Right.
That they would so many hours a day. The parents and then teams of neighbors or and family would volunteer, to come in to just move that child's little arms and legs from the polio
Right.
situation. So that's very interesting that you said. And my husband was, probably the same year, because he was only 6 years old when
Oh,
that
wow.
he had polio, and there was the whole epidemic had gone through. He was in Lowell, and the epidemic that went through there, we later ran into we met at a radio station in Lowell, as a matter of fact, and when we were working there was another man who was a child at the same time, and he was paralyzed from the waist down, and on braces, braces that he had to manipulate to sit down, because his legs were totally useless, and on crutches. And I used to marvel at him. We had a full flight of stairs up to the studios, and he would come in the morning swinging himself up those stairs, and worse yet, going down them at the end of the day. I used to wonder that he made it without falling, but he was that severely damaged with the polio. My husband had one leg that was left with a problem for the rest of his life, but in and out of Children's Hospital. But that's the interesting thing. Lakeville Hospital was there to take, did anyone have to pay for the cost of this? Was it
I
totally
think it was state-owned.
State-owned, yeah.
There's the last hospital in 1964 was called Lakeville Hospital. Where Bernie and I were was called Lakeville State Sanatorium.
Oh,
And they refer to it in the town as the SAN.
okay.
So the building that we were in is no longer there. It's been completely demolished. Some of the other wards are still there, but
But as I said, I've heard about Lakeville Hospital as
Oh,
such, not
okay.
the sanitarium, but never really knew, what its particular purpose was, and that's why it's so amazing to hear.
well, I think the Lakeville Hospital was more. They went to the cerebral palsy. They
Okay.
changed it because the tuberculosis
Was
kind of
kind of wiped out.
was diminished and wiped out. So they had a lot of other illnesses there from time to time, even to the point I think it might have been like a respite care or convalescent home. I think they had a lot of changes.
Yeah. Well, that's just that's the only reason I knew the name at all, and that it was there, but
Right.
never realized, even its full purpose. And Bernie, I didn't realize that it was tuberculosis that you were talking about too, because you were talking about you had an accident when you were a child.
Right.
Was it an automobile?
I was hit by a car in 1942, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And in 43, after having problems walking and so forth, I went with a school nurse to Lakeville, and they admitted me.
You were how old?
I was 9.
9. Wow.
And I was there roughly about a year and a half. They kept me in bed for 6 months. They got me up for the other time. And then they sent me home. during that time, I had a walking cast on my knee, so I couldn't bend it, you know.
Mhm.
And after the period, year and a half, they sent me home, and I went, being of school age, I have to go to school, so I was home maybe, possibly almost a year, and then one day I was going to school, and I walked to school, and I got in school, and I couldn't walk anymore.
Oh, my gosh.
So they called a cab, and I ended back in the Lake Lucerne. I was there maybe about a year.
Hmm.
They decided to operate on me. That's when they fused my knee.
Hmm.
And that was in March of 1946.
And that they thought that was the best thing to do at the time.
For me it was, because I still have my own leg,
Mhm.
and I'm pretty functional.
They were
with
not
it.
able to, they were not able to make the joint work. I mean, they didn't
No,
do the knee.
They talked about, at that time, they had partial replacements.
I was going to say they didn't have the knee replacement.
Yeah, they don't have what they have today.
Yeah.
Dr. Jelinek advised me against it. He explained to me where I was growing. I would have to come back every 6 months to make some sort of adjustment.
Oh, my.
The adjustment would be another operation.
Another operation? Oh, wow.
And,
Yeah.
and they don't have the anesthesia in them days that you have today. And every one of us that went through with that ether, and I'm sure there's people out there that have gone under with ether, it stays with you all your life. It's something
Really?
that just doesn't, it leaves like a nightmare in you.
No kidding, because
yeah.
you sort of,
You still get the smell of that
yeah,
sometimes in your mind, or
and maybe not totally
Yeah,
out enough to not
yeah,
understand
it's-
something was going on with your body.
well, it just leaves you that feeling.
Huh.
And I've had other operations since then, but with the new anesthesia,
Mm.
gee whiz, you wake up, you're fine. With
Mhm.
the ether, you're sick for 3 or 4 days.
Huh.
You can't hold nothing down. You can't eat.
And they didn't have the medications for that either in those days, the
No,
nausea
You
medications.
just suffered it out.
Ugh.
My mother used to come when after it was operated on, she'd just be sitting in the room. And she says, what's the matter, Ma? She said, I'm falling asleep. It stinks so much ether in here.
Oh, God.
Because it's in your whole system.
Isn't that
But
something?
that really put you under that stuff. But that's all they had in those days.
But it's interesting because I had a knee replacement done, it'll be 10 years in November, and I remember at the time, the surgeon saying that they were just then beginning to do it to someone, quote, quote, as young as I was, not that young, but they said they usually were waiting until 70s, 80s, because they couldn't guarantee that the replacement would last more than, say, 10 years, and they didn't want to do it too young, or they'd have to redo it. And as a matter of fact, when I was having my knee done, my roommate was a much older woman who was having hers replaced because she was having trouble with the one that had been done before. And they had to start all over again. And I remember thinking, what an awful thing that was to have to go remove the one that was there, as you're saying, and replace it. I mean, who'd do that on purpose? She had no choice because she'd run into difficulty. But he said that now they're supposed to last a good 20 years, so they'll do them younger. And they may even be more improved than that in the last 10 years. But I remember him saying that, and I thought, isn't that strange? They'll do it, but they don't want to do it too young because it'll just have to be redone and redone and redone. And you feel like the Superman or something,
Right.
having the parts replaced all the time.
They told me where I was growing that.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
And
That makes a lot of
And
sense.
the second disadvantage at that time was it would be no full movement of the knee. It would be a partial movement.
Mm.
And then you don't know where your leg has been in a cast. You lose the muscle.
Sure.
And they don't know if you can bring it back,
Mm.
if you're going to be better off with a stiff leg or a partial movement,
Mhm.
if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it turned out the way it did because
you are.
I've done most everything.
Oh, I know you've done everything I can think of, including polka
I've been
dance.
pretty good. Gale had the same doctors that I did, and I'm going to use his name, she got it fictitious, Dr. George Van Gorder.
Mhm.
Without him, I wouldn't be here today.
Oh, wow.
It comes to the point they say, well, you can't walk, you can't do this. Without physical therapy, occupational therapy, and the people that work there, I wouldn't be here,
Huh.
really, because they keep you active enough and your mind occupied enough.
There's special people
Exactly.
that work in those places, yeah.
Right, and some of them weren't too good. In her book, we had problems with a few of them.
Oh, there's always one here and there,
Well,
in any hospital or any job
A
or
lot
any,
of them think,
yeah.
because you're there, everybody there is your mother and your father.
Mm.
But my mother and father weren't there. They were home in Bridgewater, and all these nurses are my mother, and all these doctors are my father, and I couldn't do nothing right.
And you're a spunky guy, I know.
Well, yeah, they took my shoes away when I was, because I did this wrong. This particular nurse, I swung too high in the swings when I was an outpatient.
Oh.
Doctor comes in and takes my shoes away.
Hmm.
So I walk around barefooted, then he takes the crutches away.
Oh, my gosh.
So now then I still walk around with the shoes or the crutches, so they put you in a private room. It was called solitary confinement for a couple of days. But you still had the physical therapy, the occupational therapy, which is fantastic.
Without it,
Without it, it's a big part of it.
Hmm.
Plus the doctors that do the actual surgery.
Mm-hmm.
For what they had in them days, I cannot complain one bit. Neither can Gale. I think she's functional. She walks. She got married, had a family, as a grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
I did. And a lot of people that we know at the book signing yesterday, they all got married. They all had families. They had normal lives.
That's wonderful, huh?
Other than being crippled up.
Having a problem. Well,
Yeah,
I know
well, you know.
I know very many people that don't have some kind of a problem, one place or another. If not immediately, then eventually, in their lives.
You got to go back to your spirit,
Yep.
and God has a lot to do with it.
Absolutely.
You learn how to pray at a very young age in a place like that.
That's interesting for you to say, Bernie, yeah. Because it's not a religious hospital.
No.
But that's an interesting question. How normal, quote, quote, could life be in there for children as you were? First of all, did you get any schooling while you were in there? Was there a church
That's another-
service on
yes.
Sundays?
I was like an altar boy there. When I was an outpatient, they had an assembly hall there, and they had a little altar that used to pull out onto a stage. And the priest would come and serve Mass for the Catholic people. And that was my job. I used to get a quarter a week. I got another quarter a week for putting up the state flag and the American flag.
Mhm.
I had like little jobs that they would keep you, And, but they keep you busy enough, the whole thing, while you're working there. They give you all kinds of things to do.
Well, there's so much to think about. You have, as you say, you're still a rambunctious child with the child's energy, and if you're being held back physically some way, that energy has to go in some direction. So they were trying to aim it in the right direction and keep you occupied, which is all to the good.
We had Sunday school. Sunday school was Monday, so we call it Monday school. Gale was in the Sunday school with us. We used to have it in the boys' locker room. Because they used to be able to wheel us in, the ones that couldn't walk, the ones who could walk in. And she was the only girl there. And,
Wow.
Of course, and now we're getting, we didn't know what it was all about then, but as the years went on, when I was operated on, we used to correspond between the wards with letters. We'd write probably 5-6 letters a day to each other.
Oh, my goodness.
Don't ask me what they said, because I probably promised everything.
Maybe we'll ask her. Right now, we need to take a quick break. We're at 586-1460. If you'd care to join us at any time, be right back.
1460 WBET.
We're back. We're talking about Lakeville Sanitarium, as it was called in the days when my two guests, Gale Perkins and Bernie Zuta, were patients there. Bernie on and off for about 3 years. Gale for 12 years in a row. I'm just fascinated with hearing about what's been going on there, and we'll get back to their story in just a moment. But first, you need to put this Sunday, August 22nd, from 9 to 3 on your calendar for New England's largest sports card and memorabilia show at the Holiday Inn in Mansfield. That's off I-495 and Route 106 on Forbes Road. You'll be in for a special treat with Boston Bruins Hall of Famers Jerry Cheevers and Brad Park. They will be appearing from 11:30 to 1:30 as autograph guests, and autographs are $9 each. Meet and greet Jerry Cheevers and Brad Parks this Sunday, August 22nd, at the Holiday Inn in Mansfield off Route 95 at exit 7A, which is Route 140. For more info on the internet, the website is www.cardboardpromotions.com. Cardboard Promotions is a proud sponsor of the Marciano and Tartaglia Sports Talk every Friday from 5 to 7 here on WBET, 1460 AM on your dial. And so for comic relief from a hectic week and plenty of interactive sports talk, it's Pete and Hank with guest hosts Pitt and Rico. Remember, that's this Sunday. back to our guest here, in between time, just all of what you're talking about, I'm just so amazed at the caliber of education you were getting, that both of you, you especially, Gale, being in there for so many years, when you finally were able to come out right into the ninth grade where you would have belonged normally, and that says so much about the schooling. Were these tutors that came in? Did you have a 9 to 3 classroom? How did it work?
They had 3 or 4 teachers that were tutors.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. J, she'd come in, she'd be the principal of the whole thing. She would set up your program for you. And the other teachers would come in during the week and spend an hour with you because they had other children there. And they'd leave you enough homework to keep your mind occupied. And they'd come every day. And at the end of the year, you'd get a report card. And if you didn't do well, you went back to solitary confinement.
They could always get you with that, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's nothing worse to a kid than being confined away from other kids and out of the social activities.
That's exactly. And, so when he would go in, when I went in, I went in, I was in the 6th grade when I left, and I came back. I was there a year and a half. I spent 9 months in bed after my operation.
Oh, my gosh.
And then after that, they got me up. And during that time, I had been seeing Gale.
I love this little romance that was going
Well, she
on.
was in the girls' ward, and I was in the boys' ward.
Yeah.
We still had the same teachers, and we could see each other, you know.
Could you do homework together or anything like that?
Oh, no. You
Oh,
couldn't,
shucks.
couldn't do anything like that. So anyways, they would have the teachers come in, and Kevin, when I left the hospital, I went right back into the 9th grade at the Bridgewater Junior High School, and I was able to continue my studies and not stay back. It was just like I had never left.
Now, the 9 months you were in bed, was that when you came home?
No. I
That was still
not
at the,
in bed
after
the
surgery
after
in the
surgery,
hospital?
Right.
But they still were giving you the teacher, the
The
tutoring
teachers
and everything,
came.
yeah?
Right, they
Okay.
came every day. And if you didn't do well, they would double up on your homework. So you kind of, you don't want to do homework. You want to see what's on the girls' ward or something like that,
Of course.
And so that they would definitely kept a strict hand on you, and the nurses were there to also back them up. And they knew how much homework you were getting, so you just better do it. I mean, I went in...
No
right in-
sympathy for the situation, right? This is what you're supposed to do, that's it.
Exactly.
Talk
Well,
about
they were
discipline,
strict,
yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
But in the long run, it was the right thing to do, wasn't it?
Well, I didn't think so at
The time, no.
But I was able to graduate with all my classmates that I
That's what I
started
mean.
with in the 1st grade. I went right through, and when I came back the last time, my operation, kids are older now, they don't call you peg leg or anything like that.
No.
They're all interested in, can I help you? You having trouble with your subjects or homework?
Oh, that's nice to hear.
A lot of my school chums were very supportive to see me graduate. And then I went back for a correction operation in the year of 1951, and they tried to do this thing between summer vacations. So now I've left as a junior, I'm coming back as a senior. But I was 9 weeks late getting back to school and for my senior year. So I had to kind of make that time up at Bridgewater High School. But I still was able to graduate, which
Good for you.
to me was a big accomplishment when you do.
Absolutely. When I think about kids, who drop out of school for so many less reasons, that they didn't have to work as hard as you were working, and how right they were to discipline you into that, because if you'd had to come back a couple of years behind your other, former classmates, you would have lost interest in school. You might have wanted to drop out, and have good reason to feel that way. This way, it was a source of pride to be able to go right back, and you deserve a lot of credit for doing the work regardless. I mean, you still had to do it no matter how much they pushed you at it. You still had to have the gumption to get it done and be there, and it mattered.
It was a little easier for me to do the homework because I couldn't get out of bed, so...
You might as well do that, yeah.
All right, you might as well do that. And without the occupational therapy, that was the big thing. I learned how to weave. I learned how to do many things. I was telling you, I made a few things in your occupational OT room there that It took me a couple of years. I started them before I had the operation, and by the time you get operated on and get back to it, it's a year and a half. I'm going to donate them to the Lakeville Museum down there that they have.
It's good to know that that's there. People might be interested in going.
Yeah, it's all about the sand. They have a special section there. And they have some of the nurses' uniforms and some of the other stuff, which is interesting to me because we haven't seen it for years.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Gale until she wrote this book.
I know.
56 years.
56 years and reunited. Isn't that an amazing story?
It
And-
is.
And can I tell? Can I tell the special little secret? Because Bernie told me first, and then you said it when we talked on the phone. Bernie gave Gale her first kiss at the. I mean, and again, to think about this being as normal a life as possible, that you were even able to have your school days romance, find somebody special in there, and then you were probably still in the hospital when he left. Is that?
She left before
I
I.
left
Oh, you left
he
before.
did.
Yeah.
Okay, even though because you started so young.
started
yeah,
early.
yeah, at age 3. My
I
God.
I was still recuperating from. I was an
Okay.
outpatient. And that's how we used to get.
And then you just lost track of each other.
Yeah, and we lost track after that.
Where did you go after you finally came out? You said you were a ward of the
When I came out, I
state.
went to live with my aunt.
Okay.
She became my guardian, and I went to live in Malden. And I was there. Like Bernie says about the school and the homework, to me, that was the most wonderful thing. And lots of times, there wasn't anyone that was in the same grade as I was, so it was like having a
Oh, yeah.
private tutor. And I was like a sponge. I couldn't learn enough. And I loved to read. And even in the summertime, they offered programs. And I just found a whole bunch of certificates that I had gotten in the summertime where I had read. And it's interesting to see the books I read.
Yeah, what did you read?
Most of them were about nurses.
Okay. Oh, because you thought you wanted to be a
Mostly
nurse?
because
Yeah.
I did want to be a nurse. I ended up, in my later years, I was the a nurse's aide. And from there, they told, the OT said to me, you really should apply for a job in Georgetown, Georgetown, Mass, where I lived. There was a private psychiatric and substance abuse hospital, and they said they have openings on weekends for someone in the OT shop. So I went and applied because it appealed to me because I only worked weekends and my husband could babysit the kids and it wasn't a problem, the work problem. So I started out there on the weekends, and then eventually I was made the director of occupational therapy, and I was there for about 27 years. I retired from
My
there.
gosh. Tiny as you are, and despite what they thought about your
Right.
lack of strength because you were.
Absolutely. But see, in the days when we had OT was basically teaching people how to occupy their mind by using their hands. And it was like crafts and so forth.
Which
So,
is always a good
of course,
thing to do.
it's changed over the years because the OTs now do a lot more of the physical therapy work. I guess I asked an OT, I said, well, what's the difference? And they told me the OT works from the head to the waist, and the physical therapist works from the waist down now.
Well, that's an interesting
And that's kind of the way it
description,
is.
yeah.
They don't work as much with the crafts as they used to. But when I did have my program there, I had a big craft program, and then they told me I had to do, they had to start doing groups because you had to keep up with the state. Then they got certified by the state. So then I did a whole complete program. It was called Coping Skills, and I ran groups for all the modalities that we had there. But I always brought a little bit of what I wanted when I was in the hospital.
Well, you knew better than
I
anybody,
knew
huh?
better. I was
Oh.
a great patient advocate to
Yes,
make sure
yes.
everything was right. And I would have patients say to me, when you walk in here and talk to you, there's something here that isn't in the rest of the place. It's almost like mystical or spiritual. And I'm a very spiritual person. And I myself, like Bernie, didn't have family after everybody kind of died.
I know, can
did
imagine
have one
all of that
aunt.
and the family gone at the
And
same
the one
time.
aunt I lived with, of course, she was in a tuberculosis stand, so there I was. But when I started it was time for me to make my first communion. And I learned,
That's interesting too. How
I
they-
learned about God and the Blessed Mother. And in my very childlike mind, it was like a miracle because they became my parents.
Oh, how
So
was-
when
yes.
all the other kids had visitors and I was there, I was just there. I'd either read or play with toys. I would visit with God and the
Oh.
Blessed Mother. And I still do to this day. It's not any different to me today than it was back then.
Now, see how interesting that is, Gail, because somebody else in that situation could have become very bitter.
Right.
And instead, you have gone in just the opposite direction. You looked at the positive outlook of it. I mean, to imagine having those physical difficulties and then losing all of your family and being, I mean, what was it like to be, you did the right thing when others were having visitors and you
Right.
couldn't, instead of moping in a corner and saying, poor me, you found another outlet for yourself. I think that's amazing
And I think I was
strength.
always like a caretaker because when the kids, when their visitors would leave, they'd cry.
Yeah.
And the nurses would say, if I was up walking around, go comfort them. So I'd go and I'd tell them about God and the Blessed Mother. And I'd say, my parents never go home. They live up in heaven.
Oh, wow, what an
I really
attitude.
believed it. And, a lot of people say, aren't you bitter? Aren't you angry? I never was.
You've had a wonderful
I
life
never
as a
was.
result of everything
I
you...
mean, with parents like that, I had unconditional love.
And we all do, but we don't pay
don't know
attention to it
Right.
as much
And
as you
I've been
did.
very well made aware of it.
That's why it's so interesting when you hear someone say, oh, well, I do this because I was mistreated as a child, so now I'm mistreating. I've
I
never been
know.
able to understand that.
I know.
Or especially pedophiles or something like that. I'd say, if you knew as a child what a horrible thing that was happening to you, how could you possibly? You're not getting even with the person that hurt you. If you were doing that, there might be some tiny understanding of it.
Right.
But you're not getting even with the person that hurt you. You're hurting another innocent child. And you ought to know better than anybody what an
Right.
awful thing that is to do. So, you've got the right attitude.
I was
when you hear-
thinking
yeah.
as we were talking about school, I didn't really go to the first grade until my son, I won't say how old, he's 49. Anyway, for his sake, I didn't want to say it, but he's 40,
That's young, that's okay.
49 this September, so that when he went to first grade, that was my first time going to first grade
Really?
in a normal setting.
Yep.
So I kind of relived a lot of my lost childhood, which should have been normal childhood, through my children. But then I had my own special childhood, so I was really fortunate.
That's right.
And as Bernie said, for the most of it, the staff was great. We had a couple that weren't. And I do write a little bit in the book about the
Well, you need to
mistreatment
tell the
that
whole
I
story.
had.
You need to tell the whole
I didn't bring any of the other children in. A lot of the others were mistreated, but I just wrote about myself because I figured I didn't want to.
Let's look at the whole picture.
Right.
They say you run across one person who perhaps is in a job where they don't belong.
That's
Because
true.
if they didn't have the compassion, the understanding, and the interest in helping you,
Right.
they didn't belong there. Apparently, you
Right.
ran into a few of those.
And just like with children, there's a lot of people say, "Oh, you know how kids are," and I would report this person,
Sure.
and my family one time, my aunt did, the one that's on the cover of the book. She
Mm-hmm.
came. She said, "What is going on?" Well, they said, Gale puts on plays here. She's quite the actress, and she has a vivid imagination.
That's
so
good.
that's how they covered it up. But this person,
Ah.
this person that abused me, finally abused the head nurse that I was complaining to all the time, and then she got fired.
Thank goodness, eventually. Do you
So
want
it's a good thing she turned on
Now, what-
someone else besides
Do you
children.
mind talking about what kind of abuse you're talking about?
I'm
Because I can
talking-
imagine somebody being abusive in that setting.
Right.
I mean, for your sake.
One thing in particular, because my children noticed it, I never took a shower.
Hmm.
I always took baths. I didn't take showers. I was petrified of the shower. And I'm still scared of water. Because one thing this nurse would do was I was always telling, if another kid was abused, I'd report it. So then I'd get in trouble when they got called down for it.
Sure.
So this one night she'd grab you. I had a cast from my shoulders to my knees with a bar between. So she'd pull me out of bed and pull me along the floor and throw me in this little small cubicle, turn the shower on. And I'd be screaming, turning my head from side to side, and just choking and
I
coughing.
mean, over the body
And
cast
then-
and everything. That wasn't
And
supposed
then
to...
she'd turn the shower off. She'd say, "Do you have enough?" And I would say, "No," because I'd be so mad
Stubborn.
being on with the shower. So I had a hard time. The other thing she did is one day she was dumping some kid's head into water in the
Oh,
sink.
my gosh.
And I was peeking under the toilet watching it.
Yeah.
And she said, "Okay, Logan, you're next." So, I was trying to stay in there a long time. I'd come out and bingo, my head would go in the water. So I've always had a fear of water.
No wonder.
And fortunately, I lived in a town where they had a nice beach and swimming lessons, so my children never knew I was afraid. I never told them. But one day I found out I was cleaning the shower. So I had it going, and I'm in there with all my clothes on, cleaning the tile. And I thought, wow, this wouldn't be bad. And I realized the reason I didn't like a shower is when you turn it on, you get that sudden impact of water. Well, then I realized if I turned it on
First
and
and then
walked
step in, yeah.
So I'm enjoying showers now.
Good for you. You even got past that.
Yeah.
I can't believe that that was going on and that she was getting away with it for any
That
length
was,
of time.
that was only part of it.
Oh,
You know, there was a lot of other
I mean,
abuse.
again, I'm thinking of a child that I knew, a friend's child who was in a body cast for a while. You're not supposed to get that wet or anything in a
No,
shower, are you? I mean,
no,
that's...
Not
oh.
really. No, they used to put you in a big flat tub, and they'd put like a couple of bedpans upside down and lay you on it, and that's how they gave you
Give
a
you
bath.
a bath, yeah.
And if the cast got wet, it would get down underneath.
Yep,
know,
and then
it
you'd
would
be
get
itching and
nasty.
all kinds of awful things would be
Right.
going on. Ugh.
Mm.
I think a lot of your attitude comes from, you learn about death at a very young age.
Oh.
You say, well, it can't happen to you, but one day you're talking to a kid the same age as you, if you're 8 years old, and then the next day you see him being wheeled down to the morgue.
Unfortunately, Marion, they had the morgue underneath the children's ward,
Oh,
so
my
we could
gosh.
see all the
Oh, my
activity that went on.
You could see them wheeling the bodies down, and you could see them when the hearse come in there. And
Take
the
them
hard part is a lot of the belongings they would throw on the gurney or load you in the hearse would be toys and stuff that
Oh,
So you
your
recognize
buddy
them.
would have, right? And then
Yeah.
the next, we both had a mutual friend. Her name was Angie, and she got worse. The condition deteriorated, and she ended up passing away. Well, you could tell by the shape of the bag that
It
who's
was
in
her.
it, you know. And then when they loaded it in, you could see the teddy bears or dolls that she had.
Yeah.
It's going so. You would see that quite often, and it was a bad situation. But you learned how to cope. Well, this is it, you know.
it can happen to me.
Yeah, it can happen to me, and you start realizing that when you're just a kid. When I
I
say
know,
8,
we-
9, 10 years
yeah.
old, here I am. I want to play ball and do other things, and I see one after the other disappear, and it kind of makes you wonder. Didn't that try to say you learn how to pray very quickly, and
But, I mean, it's, for that being a bad thing, it served you well to understand. Earlier, you mentioned earlier, Gale, about, we wonder when someone dies, should we take the children to the wake? Should we tell them about it? I remember a family experience with my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, when her grandmother died, and her children were very, very close to the grandmother. She'd been in the hospital first, and she told them, Grandma's sick and she's in the hospital. And then my mother, not knowing that they had not told them that she died and it was buried and everything, they told them nothing about, they didn't get to go to the funeral or anything, which is a mistake to begin with, because there's no closure for the child.
That's right.
And my mother, the next time she saw the children, just expressed, how sad she was about Grandma passing away, and they burst into tears because they didn't know, and the parents got upset, that we didn't tell them. And my mother said, well, first of all, how was I to know that? And secondly, that's not really the right way to handle it. Whether they're going to think Grandma's in the hospital for the rest of her life, or you're never going to go visit her, how do you get past that stage?
I know when my mother died, nobody told me. They didn't tell me till I was leaving the hospital.
Years later.
So she had died when I was 4, and I did not know. My aunts were writing letters to me from her,
Oh, my
and
gosh.
I didn't know the difference.
Now, do you think that was a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, maybe in the situation I was in, it was a good thing.
Yeah,
I
kind of
think- I
eased you
think
into
was
it by the
Yes. Mm-hmm.
because you weren't going to be going
Because
home
I
anytime
certainly,
soon and
when I
didn't
was-
see her anyway.
No, and when I was going home, I said, I kept saying, oh, I can't wait to see my mother.
Aw.
And then, of course, they finally did tell me the day I was leaving.
Oh, but that was a little late to wait, too,
Right.
wasn't it? Maybe.
But
yeah.
I was so excited about leaving, because the thing is that I was focused on would I really get in this car, because I used to dream every night. I used to dream every night that there was a car at the end of the ramp, and I'd walk down, I was going home, and I'd say goodbye to everybody, and when I'd go to get in the car, it would disappear.
Oh, that's
So
logical.
this day, I wanted to make sure that car wasn't disappearing.
And what was it like to come home after all those years, to come
It
out
was
into a different
strange.
world?
It was very strange. Everything was so new. I think of the children that, even when my children turned 15, how many things that they had experienced that I didn't experience until I was 15, and they were experiencing them at 4, 5, 6.
Right.
So I just I was very quiet, didn't say too much. I just observed everything, and
Then you went back to regular school and graduated with your classmates as
yes,
well?
I did. Mhm.
Um,
Right.
were they as accepting and helpful to you as Bernie
When I
was?
first went to junior high, there was some girls. In fact, a few years ago, I went to my 50th class reunion. I had not gone to any of them, and the 2 girls that took me under their wings were there. And
Oh,
just
that's
as
nice.
wonderful
Yeah.
today as they were then, and I was thankful. I listened. I learned to listen, which really helped me with my skills when I went to work at the psych hospital, because I figured I had to listen to know what was going on,
Sure.
because what was going on in my life was really foreign to anybody else, or had gone on in my life.
Well, I must say, you both are so very well adjusted, so into normalcy, and yet with all this extra strength and this extra wisdom. I always knew you were a wise person, Bernie. Now I know. Now I know part of why, as you say, to experience things at a young age, you could go in one direction or the other. I mean, someone else would say, "Well, life's too short. Why should I bother?" Blah blah blah, or go out and do bad things, and or be bitter and angry because why did God let this happen to me? And I must say, it's just a little time I'm talking to you, Gale. I can see what a wonderful person you turned out to be. I know Bernie did for many many years, and I wish I had more time to continue talking. The book is called The Baby's Cross. Is it available in bookstores?
It's available at Maria's in Middleborough,
Okay.
the Hallmark store there. It's there are a few copies at the museum,
Okay.
and it can also be bought through authorhouse.com. Is it on the web, authorhouse.com?
Authorhouse.com, because I'm sure that a lot of people will be interested in.
Or if anybody's interested, I have my own website, which is
www.butterfly.com/Gale.
What was it?
slash.
www.
I can write it down for you after.
And let's
if you
tell
want to.
for the people.
Oh, it's www.butterflight,
Butterflight.
butterflight.com/Gale, Gale,
Okay.
slash.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be people that'll be interested in reading about it. Some that may have had similar experiences or just would like to
This
know
is
what it was
true.
like to have that. And I think, again, you were meant to put the book out. You were meant to reconnect with Bernie at this
Yes.
point in your life.
I know.
And we were meant to meet too, I'm so happy to
I'm
say.
sure.
Thank you so much for both of you, and continued blessings on all of you. We'll be back again on Friday with another edition of Conversations. Marion Roble saying thanks for listening. Stay tuned for John Riga's footing around. I think he's got a guest host again today. He's on vacation. And thank you, Dante. Bye now.